Hey everybody, welcome to our weekly Bible discussion. We are reading through the Bible twice in 2026, and we are happy to have you along for the ride. We're just here to discuss what we've read this week and hope it'll be helpful to everybody watching.
And what did we read this week?
We read 1 Samuel chapter 19 through the end of 2 Samuel. Chapter 22, I think, right?
Chapter 24.
24.
A lot of history.
I see it now.
It's on the screen. A lot of history. So very different reading. Well, last week was too,
Yes.
right, with Judges and 1 Samuel. So we've kind of transitioned into what's going to be a really long narrative
Right.
time. Like a lot of reading is going to be this way. So different. Like it felt different. Like it literally just felt completely different reading it. There wasn't all this repetition of the stuff, the
Yes.
genealogies, the sacrifices, or the counting. We none of that. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
In
It
fact,
felt very different.
It's even different, I felt, narrative-wise than Genesis. We got a lot of story in Genesis, but like you're saying, a lot of that story was like so repetitive. It's like, Jacob was at the well, or not Jacob, the servant of Abraham is
Right.
what I'm thinking of. He was at the well, then he told the story again, then he retold the story a third time.
He's told what to say, then he
Yes.
kind of rehearses. Yeah. Oh.
But I found reading this, it was much faster, which made for more interesting reading, at
think
least
so.
for me,
think
a
so.
modern reader.
This is more what we're used to.
Right. But I also found myself going, I wanted a little bit more detail there. Like, tell me more about that guy,
Right. And I think that's a curse of the modern person too. I often talk about this. Like the Bible's not meant to be a history book in the
Yes.
sense that we think
Yes.
of history books, where we either have a textbook that has, all of this laid out and we have a timeline and all these details, or we go deeper into like a biography or some other kind of book like that, and it's all, super well researched. That's not what this is, right?
That's right.
This still is the story of God. This still is the story of God redeeming his people. And now we're just zeroed in on, again, a particular few people and kings mostly. And we will be for a while, right? Several more books will be zoned in on these kings. And as the nation follows that. So it's a very different pace. And there is a lot of detail. So I almost thought, man, I need to listen to that again. Because again, I'm hearing it. And I sometimes would just have to back it up because, there are a lot of details.
Sure.
Which begs a question we were talking about earlier. Why are some of these details in there?
That's right.
And then other ones that we would like to have in there aren't in there. And so I think that's part of the challenge, but also the fun and some of the depth of reading this in such large chunks that you can see this and then try to figure out what's going on.
Yeah. I do think we don't have all the answers to like why all of these details are here, why certain stories are told and others aren't told. We might have ideas about some of them, but I think what it teaches us is to read the story, not narrow down into one single story, but get that big picture view, see the forest for a minute,
Right.
and really try to understand why is this story being told in the way that it is. I think that's a
Right.
really important question. So just to get us all on the same page, our reading this week starts with David really running from Saul. Saul grows to hate David after he kills Goliath. People are praising David. They're not praising Saul. And so our first part of the story, David is running from Saul. Saul's going to end up dying. That's kind of the transition point between 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel. And David becomes king. So we get some of David's kingship stories, which is going to be good. Not all of it will be good.
Mostly.
And then the back half of Samuel, David's on the run again, but this time from Absalom, his son, and maybe some turmoil in his family. So that's kind of the roadmap of where the story goes. What did you find interesting in the text?
Is there a somewhat of a parallel between Samuel and Judges, where it kind of starts off okay and then it gets worse? Or I guess Joshua and Judges, and then 1 and 2 Samuel,
Sure.
and it David's kingship starts off well, but then it kind of degrades for various reasons. I think we'll probably get to. Saul's kingship kind of started off pretty good, but then it falls apart. I just wonder if, we're going to see this pattern over
Sure.
and over.
Well, and isn't that the story of humanity and sin? Humanity started off great.
But that's something another big piece. We're seeing real people
Right.
doing real things. It's not always the right thing. It's not always the smartest thing or the best thing. But even so, God's plans they're going to happen. It's just which servant chooses to follow God and which servant chooses not to. And so you get a big contrast between Saul and David. And that's a big chunk of this picture. A lot of that last part of almost all of that last part of Samuel is David running away from Saul because Saul's kind of losing control of everything.
Yeah. Well, let's isolate that part of the story first then, and let's just were there details in that section, the last part of 1 Samuel that struck you as interesting, or anything new that you were just like, I didn't remember that was there? What did you think about that, or anything just our readers should be aware of?
I mean, I'm having trouble remembering where how
right.
where one stops and the other begins. But I mean, essentially, you have this whole period of time where we learn some really important things about who David is. So the David and Goliath story tells us a lot about David, right? Which we talked about last time, and it's one of the most famous stories in Scripture. Everybody knows about it. It's used in so many ways, and then we see this kid essentially become a grown-up warrior leader, best friends with Jonathan. I think that's a hugely important piece of this whole story. Meanwhile, Saul kind of goes in the opposite direction. Again, he goes down while David goes up. This is God's design. But you learn a lot about David throughout all these stories, right? He ends up with 600 sort of worthless men, right, that are his followers. Mm-hmm. Some of them become his mighty men later, but he's got this gang of people following him and their families and David's family. And we get a story where they go to war with the Philistines against Israel, but then the other Philistines are like, no. We can't have that. Then he goes back, and the Amalekites have destroyed their city and taken all their people. And then, so kind of helps us realize that life's happening to these people. We're reading the story from so far away and so late, but these people are living their lives. We need to remember that we're living our lives in the middle of everything that's going on with us. And as we're trying to be righteous and so on. So we make a choice that has consequences. And you see that with David. So he chooses not to kill Saul on 2 occasions, mm-hmm. right? And I think everyone would say, why? He had every right to do it. He knows he's the next king.
All of his men said that.
All of his men will say that. Some of his great men will say that. Mm-hmm. And what's the brother? One of the brothers, Abishai. He says it, right?
Yeah.
What are you waiting for? The Lord has put Saul into your hands, and so. You see David's restraint, I think, in a lot of this, right? Mm-hmm. And his love for God as a parent. Again, he doesn't always make the perfect choice, but his love for God as a parent. I'm going to do things the right way. And so think about it, David kills his 10,000 Saul. David could have just said, I'm the guy, and kind of done what his son does later, right? What Absalom does. Mm-hmm. David says, no, I'm going to leave. And let it play out.
Yeah.
And I think, again, that tells us a lot about who he was as a younger man. I think God uses all that time to help build him into a great king. But underneath all that was still a guy who loved God and trusted God. So when you read all those stories, he picks up some wives in there, like what's the guy's name?
Nabal.
Nabal,
yeah,
right? And that whole situation with Nabal, and in that, you kind of read it and you're like, well, Nabal's a bad guy. So this I found to be a really interesting story. Nabal's a bad guy, and he was described as kind of a drunk. He treated everybody poorly. And David comes, he says, look, we need some supplies. And the guy's like, no. But David had been there for a couple of years, and they hadn't touched anything. They hadn't mm-hmm. stolen anything. So David had all these sort of bandits, and he formed them into this band, and they were protecting people. He was doing a kingly thing, even while Saul was hunting him down. And then, Nabal's like, no, and David's going to enact justice on him. And of course, Abigail, right, kind of puts a stop to that. God actually judges Nabal and kills him. But I find that you see that throughout all of this. Every time David's around, the people appreciate him, they like him, he takes care of them. You know, even the situation where they burn the city and they go and they recapture all their people. Well, he left people with the baggage and he brings it all back and they're dividing the spoils. And the guys are like, no, they shouldn't get anything. David said, no, everybody gets the same portion because that's kind of like their assigned duty. It's not their fault that they couldn't go fight. Like he didn't say that, but that's the idea, right? So all of these things, and he's not king yet, but these are all very kingly things. He's taking care of the people. He's taking care of his men, taking care of their families. He's fair. You know, all this is before he ever gets actually crowned king.
Yes.
And that's the kind of king he will be.
Yeah. He's been anointed king, but he hasn't had the sort of official capacity granted to him by the people at least.
Yeah. And I think people need to understand too, it may not be clear, but it's years.
Yes.
Maybe decade, couple decades, I don't know exactly. What is it? I mean, it's at least a decade. I think it's more like 13 or 15 years or something, but it's years, maybe more than that.
Yeah.
Before he's crowned king of Judah, then it's another 7 years before he takes over the entire nation. So this is a long process.
Yeah. So in that period where David is on the run from Saul, a couple of interesting things happen as I think about that. You're describing, rightly so, sort of the way that David fairly and justly deals with his people, the people surround him and sort of the people he interacts with. Even though he's not the king of Israel yet, granted by the people that authority, he is acting like a king with regards to the other nations too. And I think this is fascinating because Saul is given certain tasks as king, like you're supposed to go out and wipe out the Philistines or wipe out the Amalekites or do all this. And every time Saul kind of half-heartedly does it or is incapable in the way that he does it and like things go wrong in his battles, David, with his ragtag team of pseudo soldiers, goes out and is thrown out of the land. He's fleeing from Saul. He hasn't been, thrown out by Saul, but he's effectively been thrown out of the land. And everywhere he goes outside of Israel, he's conquering the people that Saul was supposed to conquer. All those people that the judges were supposed to conquer and Israel was supposed to conquer before them, David starts actually claiming the land. And so by the time he does come around and Saul's dead and out of the way, it's a no-brainer for him to be crowned king. He's won all the territory for them. I thought that was really interesting that David goes and fights these battles that Saul was incapable of fighting.
Never did. You were asking about humor in one of our conversations earlier. I found that really amusing that when he's working for one of the kings of the Philistines and he would go out to war and the king would say, hey, what have you been doing? Well, I'm doing this and this and this. But what he was taking care of all these other groups that they hadn't dealt with before. And so kind of, again, setting himself up for what was going to be the future where he doesn't have to deal with them. And he's fulfilling the command. So again, doing kingly things before he's even the king.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move forward a little bit and try to tackle the next section, right? So eventually Saul does die. He dies in battle. And at the time, that's the war you were referring to earlier. David is actually like with the Philistines there in kind of this weird turnabout. Yeah. And the whole time, they actually say, you can't come fight with us. And David uses that time to like go destroy the Philistines. It's kind of this interesting little story. But Saul dies, and that leaves the throne for David to take. And we have this, just kind of thinking of big chunks here. David as king. What should we notice in that text, Mike?
Well, that's a big chunk.
That's a big chunk.
Again, if you take the whole picture, because we're going to get to the end of David's life, starts off really good. Again, David continues to attack and defeat all these peoples. And of course, there'll be a civil war, unfortunately, in Israel. So Saul and all
at the beginning
of his reign. Yeah. So he's crowned king in Judah first, which is where he's from. He's from Judah. So, and of course, Saul's from Benjamin. So there's a lot of conflict there, and they're close together. But again, David's doing everything right. He's in battle with his men. He's taking care of the people, all the things we talked about a minute ago. Saul and all of his sons were killed, including Jonathan, which is tragic. Imagine, like you try to imagine, what if Jonathan had lived and stood next to David and said, "David's the king,"
Yeah.
and then Jonathan obviously would have become his chief advisor. He would have been the guy, right, to help David, but instead he gets killed, and there's probably a lot of reasons for that. But there's a son who's alive, and so Israel kind of stays with the king. I think politically you can kind of see why that happens, even though Samuel anointed David to be the king. So we have, unfortunately, a civil war. Unfortunately, there's a lot of back and forth. So we have the whole scenes with Joab, David's war leader, and his brothers, and Abner, who was Saul's war leader, and now Ishbosheth's war leader. And again, there's this 7-year period. Unfortunately, David has to go to war with them.
Yeah. Let me jump in there real quick and just a point I thought was really interesting as I was reading through. For those of you who are longtime Bible students, have been sitting and reading the Bible for a long time, you'll likely know that where we're heading with this history is towards an ultimate division of Israel.
Yes.
There's going to be a northern tribes, southern tribes. The north will be called Israel, the south will be called Judah. One of the things that struck me as I was reading through this is how many times before the division of Israel that there was this allusion to Judah and Israel doing something. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes they went their separate ways in doing it, and that's what happened in the Civil War. And then at other times it was just David reigned over Judah and Israel.
Mm-hmm. Seems strange, doesn't it?
It was like, and as I was reading that, I thought, wait a minute, we're not to that point yet. But it's almost like the writer is prepping us for this reality of division, and maybe there already is some feeling of schism there.
I feel like there is, because it seems like they are already referring to themselves. I don't think that's written back into the text like sometimes we see other things written back into the text. From where we're writing things back into, we'll see it. This so and so did this, and this lasted until the day of this king, but we're really writing about something way back.
Right.
I think that's already there.
Yeah.
And I don't know why. Other than maybe, this kind of thing, because Judah is so big and powerful, and everyone else is. It seems like they're always just everyone else. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's something that goes back to Judges and some things that were going on there. It is strange.
Yeah.
But that's not unusual in history. There's a lot of kingdoms that have two crowns, like Egypt.
That's right.
Persia, right? Lots of them have. England has more than one. Yeah. Their flag has all these stripes, right, from different parts of the kingdom that come together. So that's not really unusual, but it does seem strange to me that for the 12 tribes, there's always been this kind of north and south division.
There's some tension there, even going back at least as far as David, if not earlier. Mm-hmm. I just thought that was kind of an interesting thing, especially as we look forward to what's coming down the road.
And maybe that's something you never forget. That's still a thing in this country, right? The division that happened. How long ago was that? 170 years ago now, whatever it was. And I'm not good at math, so 160 years ago. And it's still there. It's still apparent in some ways, in some places. So I don't know.
All right. So we've got David becoming king. We've got one of the challenges with this section. I'm sure if you've done the reading, you saw this challenge. There's so many names, right? And so you've already thrown out. We've got Abigail and Nabal and Joab and Abishai, and you got Saul and his son Jonathan, and then Ishbosheth is the name of the guy who ends up kind of competing with David.
Saul's son, living son.
And so we've got a lot of names to keep track of. I think my encouragement to anybody struggling with those names, because I continue to struggle with those names. I think in recent years I've come to cement some of them better in my mind. Mm-hmm. If you feel overwhelmed reading these names, I would just encourage you to keep reading the story. That would be my first encouragement. And then also go back and read it again. And maybe you want to wait until we're going to read it again later this year.
Right.
But the more you go back and read these stories, the more we'll become familiar with these guys. And
Well, at least this time they're characters that are in the events, right? We read all these genealogies and
Sure.
and we
These
talked
guys are
about,
doing something.
Yeah, why those happen is to place it in time and give them references. But now these people are actually doing things, and so it should be easier. Not quite as bad as reading Russian literature, where every character has 15 different nicknames. If you've ever tried to read War and Peace, you know
Russian
what I'm talking
literature.
about. Don't do it.
All right.
So here, though, most people have their names. One thing about names, since we're on that as I was hearing this, and I don't have an answer, and I haven't looked it up, but it would name someone and say they were like a Gershonite or a Jerethite. I'm just making this up, and everyone was like an Ithite of something.
Yeah, that's right.
And we're not talking about. I would expect, well, they're Benjamite or they're Ephraimite or something like that, and you get that sometimes.
Sure.
But then it's like, well, their dad was this guy who was a clan of this guy, and it's. I don't think we can appreciate how they broke that up, like what all that means, and all these names. And sometimes you wonder, and maybe this gets confusing too. Are these people even Israelites? Well, they are. It's just the way they identify themselves by clans and different things, but I think that makes it strange.
Yeah. Well, and it seems like certain clans were known for certain things, like, oh, well, he's one of those people, so he clearly has this characteristic or something like that.
And
a lot of
they're a Texan,
That's right. A lot of those things are just challenging for us because we're so far removed from the culture, and that's not to say we couldn't hunt down information about that and find meaning in that, but don't again, we're trying to make this unimposing. Like, this is some hard stuff,
right?
But don't feel like I don't understand that, so I'm done. Like, keep going.
Yeah, keep
going.
Working
with us.
Read the stories, read the history. Don't try to moralize it, right?
Sure.
We were talking about that earlier. Don't try to moralize it and make everybody a good guy, because everybody's not. Even good guys do bad things, as we're gonna get to. God's plan's unfolding anyway, but we're seeing how real people deal with real things and real issues, and then how to deal with God, right? How should we deal with God? Because how did they deal with God? We can learn. That's one of the things we're learning here.
Sure.
But also that God's always there.
Sure.
Like, when you get down to it, I don't understand what this passage means, like in the minute detail, but I know one thing, that God's still behind there and still working, and it'll be okay, even though this person just royally messed up.
Yeah.
So with David, are we ready to go there? I mean, I think we made this contrast last time. David is a strong, faithful person. Saul really never was. Saul was a great warrior. David was a great warrior, but that faith was missing, and then it showed in important events, right? It showed Saul's weakness showed where David's strength showed.
Sure.
Like in almost every case.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big one to see.
Yeah. Until
One
of the big stories we get here is David's grave sin, where he sees this woman, Bathsheba, and takes her for himself. He had no right to her, had no right to force himself on her, and yet he took her in his own lust. And this becomes like the big. It becomes a couple of things. It's the one. Not that David was perfect otherwise, but in terms of the story being told, it's the one big blot on his otherwise, pretty sterling
good
reign.
And it's a big blot, right? That's the thing. We understand nobody's perfect, but this guy did some terrible things.
Right. And then it becomes, after this, I mean, David's reign, his family, everything just sort of takes a nosedive. And all of the troubles that come out of his life, you can kind of point back to this as the event where everything started to unwind for him.
I think so.
And we've got a lot of things happening here. If you've read the story, you're probably already familiar with the story to some degree. Many people are. You've got not only the immorality of David, you've got the power dynamic of David forcing himself on somebody in a lower position. You've got outright murder, deception, trying to cover it all. I mean, it's everything in the book that could possibly happen.
Yep.
David does it there.
And yet this is the man after God's own heart,
That's right.
We're told. So, right, probably a ton of lessons there, but you see this movement of David. He's out there fighting, he's doing his thing, he's with the men, he's being a king, and then he stops, right? He's at home hanging out. And it specifically says, it's a time when everybody went to war, he stayed home. Yeah. And then so now he sees this. It's kind of idle hands are the devil's workshop almost. Like, he's the king. I guess he has the right not to go, but in a way he's supposed to go, and it's who he is. Yeah. But for whatever reason, he's not. All of this happens. And it's horrific. Like, I don't know anybody that I know of that's done that. Yeah. To that level. But then again, right, there's consequences. We said earlier, every action David takes, every action we all take, there's a consequence. So there's going to be major consequences. Like you said, this is the turning point in his rulership. Now it'll get better for a while. Again, he'll go back to war and kind of back to doing the kingly things for the most part. But he has a couple of weaknesses, especially for his own children. But who wouldn't? Mm-hmm. But this is one of the most tragic sort of events, I think, that gets recorded in Scripture. And it's as a parent, I can imagine the grief there. But it's also really enlightening how David handles it. Yeah.
We're obviously not there yet. David's going to write a whole psalm about this that we'll read when we get to the book of Psalms. Yep.
Psalm 51.
David is repentant, which to his credit, he repents. Nathan confronts him. The prophet Nathan confronts him, and David's repentant. And one of the great things about this story, and we haven't quite gotten there yet, we've been introduced to these characters, but we don't quite know what they're going to do yet. But God does redeem this story, which is interesting. Mm-hmm. It's Bathsheba whose son, Solomon, gets to reign in David's place. Right. And so for all of the terrible things that David did, there was some positive result that God drew out of this by raising up Solomon to Bathsheba's son to reign in David's place.
And again, that tells you that God's working here to do this, that no one's irredeemable. No situation is, there may be irreversible in physical terms, but they're not irredeemable. So, I mean, the story. I trust most people know the story. One of the consequences was this child will not live. The child was born, and it was a boy, which, it's what you want as a king. And the prophet said one of the results is this child will not live, and other is you'll have all this trouble with your family. And again, it's like the rest of the book is one son after the other doing something sort of crazy. And that'll go on into the next book too. Mm-hmm. Trying to take over. I mean, everything Nathan says will happen, happens. But to me, like, the real crux of the story is, what does David do? So he fasts and he prays. Yeah. For like a week, for several days. And his advisors are wondering what's going on. And then the child dies. And they're whispering in the corner, and David figures it out. And they say, yes, the child died. And David cleans himself up, and he praises God, and he moves on. And I love the explanation. Why did you do that? That makes no sense. Yeah. And he says, listen, while the boy was alive, maybe God would have changed his mind. That's what I was praying about. And now he's not. I'll see him again, right? So David had some understanding of the eternity. And I will then move on, right? I have to move on with my life. I'm still the king. And these are unsaid things, but I think implied. While he was alive, I prayed that he would live. God said no. I'll see him again. What are we going to do today? Yeah. Which is amazing.
Can I say something only tangentially related?
No.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. You said that David's response was fasting and prayer. I think at some point we should do a video about fasting.
Let's do it.
And I think anybody watching this should comment below if you would like to see a video on fasting. I've seen that in our culture recently. Mm-hmm. It's that time of year where a lot of our religious friends are doing that. It showed up in our reading.
In our reading.
And so I think we should do something like that. So let us know if that's something that you would like to see.
Or any other ideas.
We
might just do them.
Yes. Okay, so real quick, David, the last part of his life, the last part of 2 Samuel is just this turmoil, primarily with his son Absalom, although it starts with one of his other sons, and now I'm, totally just, my names are escaping me. So what's that other son's name, and why can't I remember it?
It's Amnon.
Amnon.
And
Amnon
his
and
sister.
Tamar. That's right.
And why are there so many Tamars?
And why do they always get the brunt end of
They
bad
always
situations?
get in trouble. Yeah, so we have Amnon and Tamar. He basically rapes her.
That's right.
It's a half-sister, right? It's from one of the other.
That's right.
They don't have the same mother. Still, it's wrong in every way.
Yeah. Well, and some of those other issues in David's life have brought about these relationships, right?
Right. And that's a minor story, but it begins the story of Absalom appears on the scene here because he's her real full brother. And so he, the problem is David doesn't really do anything about it. And so Absalom, here's now part of David's problem. He doesn't seem to do a lot about his kids going off the rails at this point. So one time I did a lesson on bad dads for like Father's Day. and it was like Eli and Samuel and David, basically.
Bad dads.
Bad dads. And they just it's like they didn't take care of it. So like just
I bet you didn't do a mom's version on Mother's Day.
No.
Yeah, okay. I'm just checking.
But like later on when Absalom gets killed, David's like, "Oh, Absalom," and Joab's like, "David, you got to stop your people are going to leave. They're going to leave you." Because David hasn't reclaimed everything. This is at that point Absalom's the king.
Yeah.
Because he took over, and everyone said okay.
And by the way, this is the second time in David's reign that there have been competing kings.
Right.
It was with Ishbosheth at the beginning, and
Right.
now it's with his own son Absalom trying to tear the kingdom away from him.
Right. And it'll actually happen again, very minorly, with another son who tries to take over because David's about to die, so he tries to take it over. And except it's supposed to be Solomon, so we have some prophecy here. So, they were told it would be Solomon, but this other son, who's another A name, I can't remember, and it's in Kings. But so this is the sword will not depart from your family, and there'll always be this turmoil. Your concubines will be taken in broad daylight. All this happens. Absalom primarily does all of this.
Yeah.
But it starts because David doesn't deal with Amnon and what he did to Tamar. And then so Absalom decides to kind of wait it out. He's pretty, what's the word? I'll come up with the word in there.
Okay.
I don't remember.
I'll break the thesaurus out.
Yes, break the thesaurus out. He's pretty smart, right? And he's going to figure out what to do. So ultimately, he uses that because he kills Amnon later. And then he gets sent away, but then he worms his way back in, and then again David just kind of is like, okay, and then he starts taking over, and David he has to have known about it, but he lets him take over. Absalom's tall and good looking and charismatic, and he just he starts helping people out, but you could tell it's from a very personal, I'm gonna just take power away.
Well, and David ends up doing the same thing he did at the beginning of his story. Mm-hmm. He was on the run from Saul at the beginning, and by the time he's an old man, he's on the run from Absalom.
Right. Right.
Forced out into exile.
What do you think about that? Was he weak, or is he doing kind of what he did at the beginning, or is this sort of like the other side of that coin? So when he left Saul, he was trying to keep the peace, and he didn't want to attack Saul when I think we could have. And he could have drummed up plenty of support and had a legit civil war, but he wouldn't. And then this time, he kind of just bails out of Jerusalem.
I think I see a very weak David here. Mm-hmm. And by the way, that David's going to be in Kings too when we open up and we see David at the beginning of Kings. Yeah. And this is one of the things about Samuel. We remember David, rightly so. The New Testament honors him as the man after God's own heart. That statement is in the text here. We remember him as a great king, and we should. The Bible describes him that way. But I do think it's worth pointing out, when we're reading Samuel and Kings, David turns out to be just as flawed as Saul.
Yep.
David turns out to be just as flawed as every other judge that has come before him. Samuel and Kings is written, from my perspective, as I read it, I see a David who has every opportunity to be the king, the ideal king that God wants him to be, and squandered it.
Yeah.
Now, I'll throw this out there as a teaser for where we're going here in a couple of weeks. When we get to Chronicles, we're going to see an entirely different kind of David. Like the David in Chronicles is going to be right on.
Right.
But here, I think we're supposed to get kind of a low view of David and recognize he failed. And we got to look for somebody else now.
Right. Right. And then his son will fail, and then...
Yep.
Right. It was just setting up.
Eventually, maybe there will be a king.
Right.
I think his name might be Jesus.
I think his name might be Jesus.
I think that's where we're going. I think that's where this story's headed.
Then there's a lot of that story to get us there, which again helps us to see like this has to unfold over time. We have to see this repetition over time. We get. It's not like God's failing, but he's demonstrating that we are failing.
That's right.
And it just takes a lot for us to recognize this.
Yeah.
I think, and so that's why this is here, right? Keeps going. Plus, we want to know the history. I mean, we do want to track the history. We do want to see what's going on. Let's go back to Deuteronomy, right? They're not gonna do everything they're supposed to do, so these things are gonna ultimately happen. But it looks so high up with David and even Solomon, right? So amazing, like it's gonna do so well, and then we come back to a split.
Yep.
And then, how many kings do we say are good? Like 6?
Not many. Not many. I'd have to count the smiley faces on the timeline.
It's up here somewhere.
It is up there somewhere. Well, let me say one more thing. One more thing I want to say about Samuel, sort of as a whole here. I think when we tend to teach Samuel, especially when we're talking to our kids about King David, King Saul, these great stories for young people. I think we tend to look at it as sort of isolated stories. Like we're going to look at this story where David fought Goliath. Or we're going to look at this story where David cut the coat of Saul in the cave. Right. Or we're going to look at this story where, whatever else happened. One of the things that strikes me, and this is probably true of all Scripture. I think it is true of all Scripture, but I see it. I see it more in Samuel, or I did this time when I read through. I find it fascinating to track themes and storylines throughout the book of Samuel. Mm-hmm. So there's like this whole storyline. Like if you just read Samuel with an eye to what Saul is doing, there's this really fascinating story about his rise and then his fall, and like you can track that whole story. Mm-hmm. If you follow just David, you can see the same thing, like his rise to power and his fall. Like that's the same story in a different way, but you can track that story. There's all these side stories. We were talking some about this earlier, where we've got the story of Joab, David's commander, and you can like go through and they're here and there, but you can just go and find Joab's name and just read his story and track with it. It's a fascinating story. Abner, where they intersect, all these different things. I will plug just briefly my priesthood sermon, because one of the strands I'm looking for as I read this, one of the strands I'm looking for is where do priests pop up in this story? And one of the fascinating things, there are priests in the story. There are priests who specifically follow David as he's on the run from Saul. They are loyal to David, so that's good news for them. They're sort of helping David out. One of the fascinating things about Samuel and the way that it describes David is how often David, if you track David's story, how often David does things, he's not acting as a priest, but he does things that make him look priestly. And so like there's the story when he's on the run where he eats the sacred bread that the priest gives him. And that's even brought up in the New Testament. It's like, well, why is he doing this? And I don't know if I have all those answers, but he looks kind of priestly there. There's times where David offers sacrifices. And maybe there's some questions about, well, is David actually the one offering? And that might be fair. Maybe he's doing it through a priest. But the way the text describes it, it's David offered that sacrifice.
It's certainly his idea, if nothing else, right? He's
funding it and he's setting it up. There's a text where, there's a verse where David is kind of setting up his administration after he becomes king. And his sons are called into positions of service in the kingdom. But the word used there to describe them is they were set up as priests. Now, that probably means that they had some administrative role, but the word chosen there is fascinating to me. And so there's this whole kind of priesthood theme about David. There may be a sermon on that coming.
Soon?
Couple weeks.
Couple weeks.
Give it a couple. Couple months.
Couple months.
Couple months. That's my year-long. Couple months. Give it a couple months.
I can't wait.
Excellent.
I can't wait. I'm enjoying that series.
I paid him to say that.
No, he didn't. He never pays me anything.
That's true.
A couple of those like crazy stories that stood out, and we're probably running long on time,
Sure.
but Saul raising Samuel's spirit,
Oh, yes.
right?
Yes.
So
we ran right past it.
We ran right past it. But remember, the spirit of the Lord has left Saul. Everything's with David. Things are getting worse and worse and worse. Like Samuel's gone, and basically Saul completely relied on Samuel for everything.
Yes.
Samuel's gone, and remember they had that conversation. Samuel said, "You're never gonna see me again." And then he goes and kind of retires.
Yeah.
And he dies, and so Saul doesn't know what to do, right? And so he had outlawed all of the spiritualists and everybody as he's supposed to.
Yeah.
That's against
good Saul.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But he managed to find one because he wants to talk to Saul.
Samuel.
Saul wants to talk to
That's
Samuel.
right. That's right. Yeah.
So there's like a couple things I wonder here. Like, was this actually happening for real in other times? But he finds this woman from Endor, which I think is an interesting thing just because of Star Wars.
That's right.
I don't know if there's a connection, but I was like, I mean, she goes, well, I'm not, I don't do that. I'm not supposed to do that. And finally, he's like, nothing's going to happen to you. She knows, she figures out who he is. And she actually raises the spirit of Samuel.
Yeah.
And Samuel's like, what are you doing? And I think the woman was as surprised as anybody. But like Saul thought this would work. So I do have those like questions like, did this kind of thing happen?
Yeah.
Now we have demon activity and so on in the New Testament, but I don't know. But it's just, Saul is so dependent on Samuel when he gets confused, even long after Samuel's dead. He's got to know what Samuel has to say. I just find that fascinating.
Yeah.
And then God lets it happen because that's the only way I can believe that word. God actually let it happen.
Yeah.
To make his point. Samuel basically says, "It's nothing I can do."
Yeah.
Why are you asking me?
Yeah.
It's just kind of a strange little story.
Samuel's the one who previously in Saul's reign had prophesied his demise. And what I mean by that is the demise of his kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
And when he calls up Samuel and says, "What should I do?" Samuel says, "Well, you're going to die." Like that's the message you get. Like the way he says it is humorous to me. He says, "Well, this time tomorrow you'll be with me."
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And he is. Right?
he is. Yeah.
I don't know. Were there any other ones that stood out? Just.
I'm sure there were. I mean, a lot of those side stories, I read them and I'm fascinated by them, and then I get sidetracked and I forget about them. And every time I read them, I'm like, oh, this is great.
Yeah. I mean, I was kind of fascinated by Abner, just kind of what kind of person Abner was and how David revered him after he got killed by Joab, murdered by Joab. And David had already, basically they had set up the peace between Israel and Judah.
Yeah.
And then Joab goes and kills him because he had killed his brother, but that was in war,
Yeah.
And David basically doesn't do anything to Joab, but he says, "Look, we lost a war hero today, a great man today," and then he mourns that.
Yeah.
But tells you about politics versus maybe religion here, and different views.
There's a lot of political drama. If you like drama, maybe Samuel's your book.
Maybe
Kings might be your book too, which is where we're going next.
follow the littler people, and you'll see
Yes.
a lot of this sort of strange stuff happening in the background.
Okay, give me 2 minutes. What should we expect in Kings?
More of the same.
More of the same? Okay.
I mean, we're going to have again a big up with Solomon, and then a huge letdown,
Yeah.
and then they're going to kind of be smaller, and then every once in a while there's a good one. Well,
Yeah.
we'll get a split, so I guess that's the big thing. We'll get a split. In the north, we'll never get a good one. And in the south, in Judah, every once in a while we'll get a good one. But both new nations now will go in the same way. They'll both be destroyed in the end because they don't follow the Lord.
I think that was less than 2 minutes.
I think that was.
Very good.
Do you have anything to add to that?
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet. I think maybe when we get past Solomon's reign, there might be some pointers as to how to read Kings, because it becomes kind of complicated.
It does. There's a lot of timing issues. You're going to get a lot of this king did evil in the sight of the Lord, and this king was worse than that king.
A lot of summary statements.
Right.
A lot, and I don't remember off the top of my head if we get into that this week or not. But when we get there, it's going to be a lot of, we're going to track with one king, and we'll see a lot of stories about other kings with him. And then we'll go back in time and pick up this king down here, and we'll track him.
Yeah.
And then we'll go back in time again. It's kind of back and forth. It's just, it's harder to track for our modern. We want things chronologically placed, and it's not always that way.
I think the other interesting thing that we're going to see these prophets pop up.
Yeah.
Right? Who come at different times to different kings, some in Israel, some in Judah, some good ones, some bad ones.
Sure.
And they pop up. Elijah and Elisha being maybe the two major ones in this time period. But they pop up and they have a lot to say, and they have a lot of influence on what goes on.
Yeah, I probably shouldn't. We probably should stop talking at some point. But why
stop now?
When there's one more thing to say, it might be interesting for some people to know these books, Samuel, Kings, even going back to Judges. This sort of stretch of books is in, if you're reading from a Hebrew Bible, the Hebrews would have called these the former prophets.
The former prophets.
And these were considered prophetic books. And one of the reasons is because there's so many prophets.
They're full of prophets
about God. And we even saw it in our reading. We got Nathan, you got Gad, you've got all these different people talking to David.
I think that we just kind of got used to Samuel for so long.
Yeah.
Or Moses, right? Yeah. And then in Judges, it's just the prophets. There's never really, other than Deborah, maybe, there's never really like a prophet that you can kind of grab on. And so now we're going to kind of get back to, the kings are one line, but then the prophets that pop up, and they usually outlive, or they usually talk to multiple kings. So you kind of have these two timelines almost that we can try to figure out what's going on.
Yeah. Well, very good. Well, let's end it there.
It's probably been way too long. We appreciate you watching and listening to us.
Absolutely. And we want you to smash that like button.
Or gently tap it with your mouse pointer. That's fine too.
Some people are on phones. Not everybody has a mouse pointer.
You have a finger.
Okay.
I'm old.
So we want you to like the video. We want you to subscribe to the channel if it's useful for you. And we're just hoping that something that we provide here will be useful and helpful to you as you're reading the Bible. That's really our only goal here.
As always, put your questions and comments down below in that section, and we will answer them as we can. Absolutely. And maybe we'll make videos out of some of them.
I think that's a great idea. And if we get a question, we'll do it. Thank you, guys. We'll talk to you later.